Hello, everyone. Good evening, and this is the May ArchSoc Western Cape talk. We fortunately managed to get set up, and I think we should have a smooth evening this evening. We've had a couple of technical problems in the last couple of talks, and hopefully this evening is a much better experience for everybody. We're fortunate to have Dr. Tammy Hodgskiss from WITS with us this evening. And she is also working at the Origin Center, so she's very much in that public archaeology role and a researcher. And she's all about ochre. And if you've all read the abstract, she's talking about the use of ochre in archaeological sites and the long time depth that ochre has been used by hominins and modern humans in archaeological sites for a range of uses, and she'll go into that in a lot more detail in her talk. We're very excited, to have her. So she's very close to home for me as a rock art researcher, so very interested to hear what she's got to say this evening. So I'm going to pass it over to Tammy, and she's going to take us through her presentation, and then we'll have the questions and answer session at the end, as usual. So Tammy, welcome, and thank you for giving your talk this evening.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's really cool, and I'm always excited to talk about ochre. I can go on for hours if you want me to, I won't, don't worry. So today I'm going to talk about something that really is my passion, and there's a really nice group of ochre researchers, and that extends to rock art researchers, and I think it's an important material in understanding certain elements of our past. So let's see if I can change this slide. That would help. There we go. Right. Okay.
Take it away.
Cool. So for those of you that don't know, I think it's always important to start with what actually is ochre, because it's a very big umbrella term that's used in archaeology to describe a wide range of materials and a wide range of rocks. But generally, it's a rock that has a colorful streak. And it's an iron-rich rock, and you can see from these pictures there's a whole range of different types of raw materials. You get shales and sandstones and hematites and specularites, and they all come under this term ochre. And they contain different materials and minerals as well. So the reds usually have more hematite and iron oxides, and the yellows more iron oxyhydroxides or goethite. But there's a whole range. I mean, even titanium dioxide is sometimes present in ochres. So it's a very general term. And there is a lot of debate between ochre researchers as well as to what does this actually mean, and what are we describing the different material in the same way or the same material in a different way. But it's a beautiful material, I think. And I just want to show you here. So I just went on an ochre sourcing trip in Limpopo. And what's very interesting as well with the rocks, this is from near Ovahimba, and it's a really black looking rock. And this is actually the streak that comes from it. And so the color of the outside of the ochre is often quite different from the streak that you get of the ochre. So it's often a lot darker than the powder that you would actually get from the rock. Okay, so I think a lot of us know about the contemporary uses. It's something that is still used pretty widely today in various cultures in Africa. There's a beautiful picture here by Rian Rifkin of Ovahimba women in Namibia, and they cover themselves in an ochre-rich paste and use a very specific type of ochre. And this is a picture by Lynn Wadley took of isiZulu woman in KwaZulu-Natal, and covering herself in this red ochre. And I've met people that buy store-bought red hematite, and they actually just mix that with ochre and use that as sunscreen as everyday use. And you have it; it's used around the world by Native American communities and also Australian Aboriginal communities. And I just had to include this picture from Heidi Gustafsson. Beautiful image of does ochre foraging and goes on these sourcing trips and does workshops with different ochre pigments, and it's still widely used in a lot of pigments that you can buy in stores. But so we know of a lot of the visual uses, and the general public will know of a lot of the visual uses of ochre. But there's a lot of the uses that we don't see, that it's still used for today and was used for in the recent past. And then obviously going back to the ancient archaeological past, we have to kind of understand these uses. So it is used as a sunscreen. I'll get into this in more detail as well, and is used actually as a skin protectant or an insect repellent. It's used as a polishing agent, kind of a jeweler's rouge to polish beads or to polish jewelry. It's an antibacterial powder. It can be used on skin and externally, and can be used to help tan hides and stop the decay process on hides. And it's even eaten. You can buy it sometimes at markets, and it's used actually to help stomach aches. So it's got a wide range of uses, far past just the color of the ochre. Cool. So these are just looking back into the kind of the more recent archaeological past. We have ochre associated with burials quite often, even going back much further, 70,000 years ago and further, you having ochre powder being sprinkled on burials or ochre pieces found in burials. You find ochre on shell beads. These are ostrich eggshell beads from Bushman Rock Shelter that Laure Dyer has looked at, that have ochre residues on them. And then I thought I had to mention the classical period use by Romans of what they called miltos, which is an ochre compound basically, and they actually even used it as a fertilizer. So some of the ochres that contain titanium dioxide was actually used as a fertilizer. So similarly to the antibacterial properties that can come into it, and often because the category of ochre is such a wide category. You might have one ochre that wouldn't work for that at all. So you'd have to know the source, and you'd have the type of ochre to use. And then these beautiful pieces of ochre are from Hohlefels in Germany, and Beth Velicky has been studying them there. And often ochre is associated in the more recent past, say after 40,000 years, in Europe and in Africa, with symbolic items. So the later use of ochre is much more figurative and symbolic and based on the pigment of the ochre. And then beautiful examples of ochre in rock art. Obviously in South Africa we have tens of thousands of rock art sites, and ochre is the main pigment that's used for all the reds and the yellows in the rock art. And across the world as well. If you're going to some of the early figurative examples, this is a really cool paper that came out earlier this year in Indonesia. Figurative art dates to 44,000 years ago. And then the really well-known piece from Apollo 11 in Namibia, that's 27,000 years old. But rock art was an important element. Ochre was an important element for most of the rock art paint around the world. In Europe, a lot of the paint is made out of manganese, and so you get a lot more black pigments as well. But it was widely used in rock art, and many pieces found at later Stone Age sites. It was a common find. But now going back into the ancient past and looking at the earliest evidence of ochre use. And in Africa, there's been work at Katupan, Bonnevac, and Kantine Kopi that's showing the ochre was collected and used even as long back as 500,000 years ago. And so these pieces are really nice, shiny specularites that are often quite dark on the outside, but have a really brilliant, shiny, reddy purple streak. And not all of these early sites that are mentioned here, not all of them have utilized pieces. So the sites, a lot of them, the pieces were collected. We know that ochre was brought back to the site. There was some value attached to it, but they weren't necessarily actually used to process powder or anything like that. And then this picture that I've included here is from a site in the Netherlands, and it's about 200 to 250,000 years ago. And this is actually ochre paint, little drops of ochre paint. So they don't have the ochre pieces at that site, but they actually have evidence that some kind of paint was being made from it. So a lot of the earliest evidence is not necessarily of actually using ochre, but collecting it. So there was still some value attached to it. But the question is how and also why did early modern Homo sapiens use ochre? So as we get into when we become humans, when we become anatomically modern, why does ochre suddenly, well, not suddenly, but why is it used so much more at archaeological sites, and it is processed so much more, and there's this desire to get these red and orange and yellow and purple pigments. So that's my handprint. It's not some fancy rock art panel from the Middle Stone Age. So yeah, as I said, we're talking about anatomically modern Homo sapiens, but a lot of debate as to whether at this time, so from about 300,000 years ago, whether we humans at that stage had the same cognitive abilities as us now. And we're seeing a lot of innovations in the archaeological record, especially from about 150,000 years ago, that suggests that there were these important changes happening, and that comes along with the regular use of ochre as well. But I also just feel like I do need to say that we do know now that also Neanderthals were also making rock art and creating symbolic items and decorative items in Europe as well. A lot of black manganese and ochre was being used. And some of the earliest evidence is dated to about 65,000 years ago in Europe, but a lot of the evidence is a lot more recent, and after about 40,000 years ago in Europe. And a lot of the ochre occurs along with ornaments and symbolic objects, similarly to in our later Stone Age periods in Africa. Okay, so I'll just show you a few sites. Those of you that, I suppose archaeological sites are often in these beautiful places, and you can understand why people chose to live in these places many years ago. It's some of the Stone Age sites, the ones that I have here. We have Pinnacle Point, we have Klipdrift, these are the Southern Cape Coast, and this is Cebu. And this is Ngwenya Cave in Eswatini or Swaziland, and it's these sites are often in these perfect places where you have a whole host of resources around you, often quite close to the sea. So you have marine resources and terrestrial resources, and then the sites have been protected because they are in these shelters that have helped protect the sediment for us to find. But you do find a lot of inland Middle Stone Age sites, and especially in the last few years, there's been a lot of exploration of, or re-exploration of some sites and re-excavation at some sites to explore them further, to understand how humans moved around the landscape and used the landscape, especially as there was much more likely, as we're seeing all these innovations in the Middle Stone Age, it was much more likely that there was some kind of social networks and culture coming around, but yeah, that's where the debate comes in. Is how does ochre play into that, and the objects that we find, what are they actually saying? So I'm just going to talk through some of the objects that you find and the evidence that you find in the Middle Stone Age after 150,000 years ago. Some a little bit earlier, but especially after 100,000 years ago, that you're finding a lot of awesome evidence for human innovation. So firstly, advanced stone tool technologies. These are some beautiful still-bake points. That beautifully symmetrical, and a lot of the points are made with special raw materials. So there was a definite understanding of types of raw material, and also manipulating raw material. So heat treating it to get a nicer raw material to make a better tool. And then these little segments or crescents from the Howissenspoort that are some of them a centimeter, even smaller, and these were hafted, and there's really nice evidence. This one actually has some ochre residues on it, evidence of hafting these and also hafting these still-bake points as onto spears or knives. So definitely a much better understanding of how to make tools and how to hunt better and get more resources as well. Then bone tools, so using different raw materials to make different tools and different requirements for tools as well, not only just for cutting meat and plants, but also perhaps for making leather clothing. Then plant bedding, so that was from Siburu, amazing bedding, and where they used sedges and laid sedges down, probably as a work surface, but also used insecticidal bedding on the sedges to help keep away insects. So it's amazing, firstly, that it's preserved back to 75,000 years ago, but it's really cool evidence that's coming up at some sites around South Africa. Then also a broader diet. So at Border Cave, there was a paper that came out last year with Lynn Wadley, that there was a broader diet of cooking starchy foods, and also at Classy's River on the Southern Cape Coast, that they found these really nice rubified or reddened quartzite pebbles or big pebbles that were likely used in a broth. And so there's an understanding of using different foods and ways of preparing it as well. And then with that also comes the control of fire. And the recent paper by Jess Thompson that showed, this was in Malawi, at about 73,000 years ago, I believe, that they had a really good understanding of how to control the landscape and actually used fire to control the plants in the landscape and change the landscape permanently. And a lot of the sites are showing organized use of space, certain areas designated to things like fireplaces, and then also from the from the faunal evidence and the bones that are found at sites, that people were likely using traps and snares and were fishing long before we actually find the tool evidence of that. Then you also have engraved ostrich eggshells from Klipdrift, and this one's Klipdrift, and this is from Diepkloof on the Western Cape Coast, and shell beads, so perforated shells, different types of shells that have been strung in different ways and actually used as ornaments. Then the recent paper that came out about a deliberial in Kenya about 78,000 years ago, and the collection of crystals, which I think is quite cool, especially if thinking about the collecting of ochre and not necessarily using it. This is in the Kalahari about 100,000 years ago. Why collect these crystals and bring them back? They're not naturally occurring in the site, but were these objects that were kept, were they traded? What is, why are these things being collected? And I kind of see the crystal and ochre as a similar object, especially if they're not used. Okay, so with that in mind, and with that bit of background, when you're finding a whole lot of these objects slowly appearing in the archaeological record, you're also finding the utilized and the collection of ochre. And at some sites you have over 9,000 pieces, sometimes a few hundred, and that's still a lot of pieces. And so that's the first evidence that you find. You find the pieces, then you find residues. So we know they were processing the ochre in different ways, and we're finding residues of that on various tools and beads and bone. I'll get into all of this a little bit more now. And then ochre patches, so perhaps work areas or different maybe spaces where they were using the rock, using the different ochre rocks and processing them or making them, and making paint perhaps. Then we have evidence of compound mixtures, so mixing ochre powder with a whole range of different materials. We don't necessarily know what for. And then also grindstones, so the tools that they actually use to prepare the ochre. Okay, so I have some nice close-up pictures of ochre. I could look at ochre all day, so I hope you find these pictures as exciting as I do. But so the pieces are used in a range of ways, and what archaeologists and ochre researchers have to do is, and with bone as well, by looking at the surfaces really closely, you can figure out how an animal was killed or skinned and what tools were used. And similarly with ochre, we can find out how the pieces were processed. And so we firstly have grinding. This is a piece from Blombos, where the ochre piece is actually ground against a hard grindstone and a hard surface, and you create a lot of really nice powder from that. Then rubbing, where there isn't as much change in the use wear, but or in the shape of the piece, but it's maybe from rubbing an ochre piece, usually a soft ochre piece, against skin, directly against skin, or perhaps on hide. Then grinding and rubbing, so you'll have some pieces that have a in Europe as well, and are so-called crayons that have a crayon shape and possibly ground down to make powder, but then the end of the surface used as a crayon. And of course, there's no evidence of rock art in the Middle Stone Age, as you know, and in terms of figurative rock art on a rock face. But it's interesting to think of. There's so much more about ochre that we don't know, and I suppose it's with archaeology. There's so many pieces of the puzzle that we have to figure out. And then scoring and engraving. So this is a very well-known piece from Blombos with the cross-hatched ochre, and then a piece from Cebudu. And then crushing is pretty important. It's something that if you have a really nice soft piece of ochre, it just makes sense to crush it in between two stones, and you're going to get a really nice powder really quickly. But then, of course, there isn't any evidence of that left in the archaeological record. Although you might have ochre powder patches and find the ochre powder on other things, but there's no evidence of the actual process or how the ochre was processed. There we go, some more grinding striations, just to show you the variety in them. They're not always these really nice straight striations. Your hand and you're trying to grind the surface, you have different markings that come up. And I think experimental work is just generally in archaeology. I feel it's so important with understanding a material and realizing what you see in archaeology is how you can kind of reconstruct that by doing your own work on it and go, okay, they must have done that, or why did they do that? It didn't make any sense. Then scoring or engraving. I like to use the term scoring just to show the process of using a sharp implement, whether it's bone or a stone tool, to make a nice mark on a piece. And I use the term engraving to show more intentionality of the action. So it's deliberate as piece, and these two pieces on the pieces that you kind of more scored or script. There's no design. The reason why we to use powder was piece of powder. So kind of from work out the intent reason the then rubbing as well, and you can see often polish forms on just really nice. And the sediment change the surface piece. Sometimes as a material. And then, so residues, mixtures, and drawing. So this is kind of getting into the more exciting side of ochre that often gets more publicity. So this is a piece from Cebudu. It's a flake, and they've found a mixture of casein milk mixed with ochre on the surface of the piece, so likely that it was scraped. It wasn't used actually to haft a tool onto a hand. So that's quite a cool piece. It's about 50,000 years old. And then these are some pieces also from Cebudu, but they have been found at other sites where you can see quite clearly red sections on the edges of these little segments. And these are very small. And Molly's Lombard and Lynn and others have done research on actually looking at the microwear patterns and looking at the residues. And they realized that ochre was actually mixed with different resins. And the tools were likely hafted, perhaps as a knife or a spear, onto stone tools. So ochre was actually used in these resin mixtures to make a really nice glue. And then the question comes up as to why. Were they adding it to symbolize blood or to identify your own tool, or was it perhaps used to make a better glue? And then these beautiful abalone or perlamon shells that were found at Blombos they're kind of known as the first earliest, first known containers. They're about 100,000 years old, or they're found in 100,000-year-old layers, and they mixture of ochre with seal fat and charcoal. And there's no evidence yet of where the ochre was actually applied or what the paint was used for. But quite exciting to find these proper little kits with a grinder, pieces of ochre, and the paste with it. Cool. And then also from Blombos is this drawing. It's on a little flake that has actually been ground on the surface of the flake, and the marks of ochre that have actually been drawn on it. It's broken off, born on the ochre, which is quite cool because we haven't got evidence of that dating back so far. That's dated to about 75,000 years old, and then the ochre on perforated beads and shell beads, and so lots of debates, and I'll get into it a little bit later about whether the shells were actually purposefully coloured, or whether it was from perhaps people, having red paste on themselves and then rubbing off, or different ways of looking at how the shells actually got the ochre on them. Then these are some of the ochre powder lenses that I was mentioning. These are some beautiful ones from Blombos and Klipdrift, where pretty thick lenses of ochre, and you kind of think that they must have been processing a lot of ochre or just wasting a whole lot of ochre if you can come up with these beautiful lenses. And this is at Sibudu on a hearth, really nice hard surface, and it seems like it was likely used as a nice working surface. So we know that there was a lot of powder being produced. What we find in the archaeology is probably a teeny portion, because we know some of these sites have tens or hundreds of utilized pieces, and we're only finding the remains of the pieces. We're not finding most of the powder. But there have been quite exciting micromorphological samples that have been done at Blombos, especially by Magnus Highland, looking at that there's actually so much more ochre and ochre pieces in the sediments than we see. You find a lot of the pieces that you find are just a centimetre or 2 centimetres and some teeny little crumbs, but there's probably so much more in the sediments that we don't see, and it's quite nice to be using all these different methods of looking closer at the soil, and hopefully we'll understand ochre processing methods even better. So when you're actually interpreting past ochre use and use of ochre by these early modern humans, we have to be quite careful of not using our understanding of how ochre is used now, and our visual understandings of ochre, and the different ways that different types of ochre are used. We've got to be careful in how we interpret archaeological ochre, and not always, be aware of that we might be biased towards a certain way that ochre should be used. And I've felt that there's been a host of really cool experimental studies done by various ochre researchers that have been so useful in helping us understand how the material was used in the past, or kind of trying to understand why sometimes it was used for something. And a lot of the pieces that are used, I don't think I mentioned it, at most of these Middle Stone Age sites, there's a definite preference to use red. Even if in the area you're finding lots of yellow ochres and orange, and in the collection you're finding different types of and different colors of ochre being collected, the pieces that are used the most are often these really nice bright reds, sometimes shiny reds or blood reds. And red is a powerful color, and so you have to kind of think of that as well. Was it something that was just visually so distinctive on the landscape, or was it because did the red indicate something else, like it indicated iron oxide, or so those social issues and social signalers, as well as cognitive developments, all come into play under ochre use. So I'm just going to talk about some of those awesome uses of ochre and the awesome studies that have been done. So Rian Rifkin has done some great studies, and I hope that he comes back into ochre someday because he's moved on, but he's doing great stuff too. But he's done some really cool studies with just in helping us understand how ochre was used, and he worked with the Ovahimba in Namibia, and looked at how they and why and how that they processed ochre and used it as a paste. You can see like full completely covered their body for ritual and for beauty as well, but also because it actually offered skin protection, and it offered protection from the sun. So and he did tests on what the SPF was on the ochre that they processed mixed with animal fat, and looking at different types of ochre and different colors of ochre, and why red. Why did they choose this red ochre? And interestingly, the traditional ways of processing the ochre were actually were more effective, and they gave a higher SPF number, which is quite interesting. So the red oxides gave about a 13 SPF, and the yellows were a little bit less. But they would the ladies that would process it, they knew which pieces were the best pieces. So I think that's a part of it. Maybe why we're finding so many pieces of ochre at the site is that you collect these pieces, you think they're great, and then as you grind them, you go, because the surfaces often look so different, then you kind of know, okay, no, this isn't the one that is perfect for what we need it for. And yeah, so pretty interesting here. So the red is this beautiful visual color and is used as a ritual and beauty item, but also is the most effective for sunscreen. Then also as a mosquito repellent. So the physical barrier is also quite important. It's mixed with clarified butter, and it offers protection from insects just generally as a barrier from ticks, fleas, lice, and mosquitoes. And some of the research that Rifkin and his team did were on looking at different binder combinations, so mixing it with water or clarified butter and animal fat, and they had a subject who would put her arm in a cage of mosquitoes or a box of mosquitoes, and they kind of looked at which type of mixture was more effective, and none of them were as effective as tabard and peaceful sleep and things that we can get now, but they still offered some kind of barrier. And so it's possible, especially as thinking of sunscreen and mosquito repellent, that ochre, as environments changed and as there was exposure to different insects or need to move to different areas because of resource availability, or just a change in environment where you're not getting the food that you need and have to travel, something like a protective barrier on your skin could have been quite important for being able to move. So it might not just have been the color. And then looking at hafting, I've mentioned this a few times. There's a really nice example. This was done for the Human Origins exhibition that's at Iziko now and is coming to Origin Centre soon. It was two little segments that are put onto a spear, and this is exactly what you're finding in the residues. So the middle picture here, that you have these red residues with resin and ochre. And so, and it's still actually used today ethnographically as well, and mixed with different things, or used as a kind of glue for feathers. The Namaqualand San use it for feathers, so not actually just for the tools. And the evidence of hafting has prompted a whole lot of different research into ochre-loaded adhesives. And so why and how were they actually adding this in? Is there any use? And there's been mixed results. I also did some studies, and Lynn Wadley and Andrew Zipkin on looking at different adhesives and different glues, and the results are kind of a bit mixed. That you do get sometimes the red, really nice iron-rich red hematites can form a really nice glue, but then you can get a really nice glue with just a silica-rich sand. And so you do think, well, why would you go to the process of grinding up a really nice hard ochre and add it to a glue if sand that you could just pick up from the ground is as effective. So it's interesting, because there was studies have also shown that the iron oxide might make it a better glue. But we do know that they were using it for this in the Middle Stone Age. So it has a whole nother use. And then also high tanning. So there's quite a bit of archaeological evidence in the Middle Stone Age and in the later Stone Age of processing hides. You're getting scraping tools and later on tanned leather and also worked bone pieces. And there's ethnographic record of using ochres, different types of ochres, usually also focusing on the red, to process leather. With different materials, sometimes directly using the ochre stone and sometimes using the ochre powder. And then some more studies done by Rian Rifkin. He looked at why these, whether there's this difference between the nice red ochre and the nice yellow ochre, and whether there's a difference as to one would function differently, or what is the reason why it was possibly used as a hide tanner, and why it's used ethnographically. And he found that the iron oxides, and especially the red iron oxides, have antibacterial and antifungal properties due to the quantity of chlorides, sulfates, and nitrates in the iron oxide. And he found that the red ochre was actually more effective to actually stop the decay process on the hides than the yellow. So again, there's another this kind of this dual evidence that you could be using it for color, and because maybe it's a material that's easier to get to, but the red actually has really good properties and antifungal properties, and the high iron oxide content to actually help the decay process during hide tanning. And then looking at polishing abrasive, so it's a whole other thing that ochre can be used for. And as I mentioned earlier, it's actually used as a jeweler's rouge. And I actually spoke to someone a few years ago whose father used it to polish gold jewelry. He was a jeweler, and that was his method of polishing gold jewelry, which is really interesting. But there's been a whole lot of archaeological evidence of ochre residues in shell beads and also bone tools. And so the question was whether ochre was actually put on these beads and tools to color them, or whether it was transferred during the polishing process, or whether what is the reason? Was it just processed? Was it used? Was it transferred? That's a word. Was it transferred during use, or put on it directly? So then there's evidence also in the European Upper Paleolithic of this, and some great studies that have been done in France and Germany of looking at the residues on bone and ivory beads, but then also in the later Stone Age and moving into the Middle Stone Age as well. And there's some studies that have been done by Joelle Nivens in her PhD that she defended last year, and she found, so she was working on sites in France, and she found that actually using an abrasive powder speeds up the polishing process a lot. So using it against a material and getting a nice polished final product, and that the grain size and mineralogy of the polishing powder does affect the polishing process, that coarse grain powders are more effective. Especially if you definitely, if you're needing to, it would depend on the kind of material as well that is being used. And if you're doing finer grained, if you're using gold and something that's a lot harder, finer grained is more effective. And then also that red hematite is more effective than non-iron oxides, so the clays or the goethites, which is interesting. So it's again another thing kind of saying, okay, the iron oxide in these pieces is important. It's not necessarily only the red. And then you can see in these pictures on the bottom right from hers, you can see the little, in the holes as you're getting these red ochres, similarly to how we find in the archaeological record in the Middle Stone Age shell beads as well. So, and then this is a study that was done by Van Haren et al. And also Francesco De Erico has done lots of work on it, and looking at how these shell beads from Blombourg were actually strung onto string. And you can see they've used ochre-colored or ochre-covered string, and the wear patterns show that they were strung in different ways. So the wear patterns around the holes, which is quite cool. But also that the ochre might have been transferred actually by using an ochre colored string, or maybe on skin that was covered in ochre paste. So yeah, so it's a whole mix of evidence. What is the evidence actually telling us? And because of the different ways in that ochre could be used and its different properties, it makes it a little bit tricky. But then another thing that adds to the trickiness is heat treatment. So it's well known that ochre, so the kind of the yellow and more orange varieties that contain some goethite, often will, if you heat it to temperatures of about over 250 degrees, it changes to more red varieties. So from an iron oxyhydroxide to an iron oxide. And it can be quite difficult to identify archaeologically. In Middle Stone Age sites, you have a lot of paths on top of each other and all around, and so it'll be hard to know whether some of the pieces might have been heated after they were disposed and post-depositionally. But you still get these really cool red pieces, and it seems like, given all these innovations and understanding of the silkrete, I've got a picture there of the silkrete tools, when the silkrete is heated, that you get a much better tool, and it changes the color of the silkrete as well. So there was a clear understanding of how to do that, putting the piece underneath the fire to heat it really nicely. A lot of ochre, if you put it in the fire, it just shatters, especially with shales and things. So it's likely that they were intentionally heating ochre and to get these really nice red colors. But there's definitely need to have some more research on this. So I hope that'll be done. Q, I'm talking to you. Okay, and then ochre use and the paleo environment. So I've touched on this a little as well. So some of the assemblages, such as Subudu Blombos and Klipdrift, have shown that when there's periods of resource stress shown through the faunal changes in the faunal and botanical remains, that we have a range of ochre is used in a much more diverse range of ways. So you find it being processed, by grinding it and by rubbing it and by scoring it as well. So perhaps using it for different applications. We don't really know, but we just know that they were processing it differently, and that there's more scored pieces. So perhaps if you are, scraping it and making some kind of design, was it as a display? Was there more social interaction or a need for social signaling as well? So there's kind of a lot of questions that come up with that. But it doesn't seem to be related when there's resource stress to having more powder production. So it's not that there's, in terms of grinding, because grinding is generally the most effective way that we can see archaeologically of processing powder. I say see archaeologically because crushing you wouldn't see. So yeah, so there is this interesting correlation possibly between as the environments changed and there was resource stress, ochre was used in different ways as well. So to summing it up a little bit, the factors influencing ochre use are access to ochre sources. So if you live 100 km from an ochre source, it's going to be, you're not necessarily going to go there very often unless it's a really desired material. So it's often quite important to establish how far away the sites are from the ochre sources. Then what you're actually wanting to use the ochre for. So whether they were processing it to get a really nice fine pigment, or where the engravings was something that was more important as well. So, and a lot of these questions are quite difficult to answer in the archaeological record. Then environmental conditions, what was needed? Were there lots of insects, really hot, wet conditions, and there were lots of mosquitoes? Did that affect it at all? Access to resources, so especially in times of resource stress, was there competition and conflict between people on the landscape, and a need to move around the landscape and actually work with other people, or to kind of socialize with other people? So there's all these questions that come into how ochre was used in the past. And these are some pieces that I I think they're so beautiful. They're beautiful specularites, and you can see like there's really, really dark materials, and they come up with this really nice reddy purple. And the but what happens is when you mix it actually into a powder, it's really this really nice blood red, shiny material. And so it's quite interesting with Homo sapiens, the early modern Homo sapiens, that there's this definite preference to use ochre to make powder rather than scoring it, but also to just collect it. And then there's a pretty consistent use through the middle to use red ochres rather than any others, and these really nice blood red ochres. And it's consistent through the Middle Stone Age. I find it quite interesting that from the Middle Stone Age all the way to now, that ochre has been used consistently for such a mix of uses. Yeah, so to sum up is that ochre can be pretty useful in establishing both cognitive and behavioral capabilities of Homo sapiens during the Middle Stone Age and coming forward. So to kind of hopefully understand what they had, what cognitive abilities they had, and making complex mixtures and understanding perhaps the chemistry of ochre as well, and also maybe using ochre as a social signaler signaler. And then complex utilization of ochre in the Middle Stone Age was likely used for its chemical as well as its physical properties. And I think that's something we have to accept with ochre, is that it is just this visually beautiful and powerful color and material, but it has a really nice iron quantity and or content, but has all these other minerals as well that could make it very useful chemically. And increased subsistent ranges, advances in technology, and periods of resource stress would have resulted in increased social interactions. So as we see that in the archaeology, it's likely that red ochre did play a part in these interactions in some way, whether it's in terms of advances in technology or in terms of social interaction. So as I finish up, I just have to talk about two things quickly. So I'm very lucky working at a museum. I work at Origin Centre, and I get to kind of merge my two passions. So ochre workshops and ochre and rock art, and I have these ochre workshops at Origin Centre. It's a really nice way to just engage with the public and learn from them, often even from kids, just different ways of using ochre, and it helps me understand it. The past better as well. So I really enjoy them. I just thought I had to show you some of those. And I think it's so important for archaeologists actually to engage with the public and do outreach projects. So we have so much amazing archaeology in South Africa, and I think everyone should know about it. And then lastly, there's the Pigments Revealed Symposium. It's happening in June. For those of you that are interested in earth pigments, it'll be a really nice collaboration between artists and archaeologists and different pigment researchers around the world. So feel free to register online. But thank you so much. That's it. I've spoken a bit long, but thank you so much.
Wonderful. Tammy, that was really, really a wonderful talk. Thank you very, very much. I think we had almost a record audience. I think it matched our best number. I think 88 to 89 people, something like that. Managed to join us this evening. You've been secretly advertising and making sure you're marketing to everybody to make sure they support you. Yeah.
It's the power of the iron.
That was very, very good. And yeah, I before we jump into some questions from the audience, I was wondering whether, because ochre studies and picking them up in the archaeological sites is relatively new. I mean, it's not, completely new, but, so it's not, it hasn't been the core of the studies for since the beginning of studies of digs. So it's still a growing discipline, I imagine. And I think we're going to find out a lot more about ochre as it goes along. So it's quite a nice area of innovation to find out more about the past. But in those ground up ochre residues, are you finding a lot of other organic material that's bound into into the ochre, the ground ochre? Is it telling us a little bit about what perhaps was being done with that ochre?
Yeah, in the residues on stone tools and things as well, or it's difficult. So in the Middle Stone Age, you because you don't get a lot of an organic preservation. I mean, we've been so lucky to find some of the plant bedding and some of the resin on the stone tools. There's so much that you don't know. So sometimes there's a little bit of organic preservation, and you'll be able to find a certain type of resin or a starch, and you know that the ochre was mixed with something. But often we don't have that. So it's a little bit tricky to know all the time. So there's a few sites that have just happened to have nice preservation that have helped us understand that better.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're excavating an old site and you aren't, capturing the sediments, unless you're excavating so carefully that you're taking away the sediment and everything else, you're going to miss everything through the sieve. So,
it's so easy. I'm very excited to see what Magnus Haaland is going to come up with, and the micro morphological samples, just because I think there's so much that we're going to know a little bit more just in the sediment with what's actually going on. It's just a whole nother avenue to explore. So
cool. No, very exciting. So we've got some questions from the audience. So I don't know if you know, Siddhartha is just saying hello, and he's joined the talk. I'm not sure if he's from Wits or further abroad. And we've got Kenelo. I hope I've got the right pronunciation. Kenelo. Kenilwe. There we go. That's the right pronunciation. Sorry about that. And we've got Kimambo. So there's lots of shout outs and congratulations on your talk. So the first question we had was from Kimambo, and are there differences between the ochre used for body painting and those used on rock art? And any idea how long the ochre painted on the body lasts?
Cool, that's a good question. So the ochre pastes for the body are usually mixed with more fatty materials. So you'll have like clarified butter or animal fat or something. So it's a really nice soft material. I've experimented with coconut oil as well. But if you use those on stone, then you get a really oily residue. It works, and it works better than just mixing it with water as a paint. But for paint, you need some kind of binder. So in rock art as well, they would have used something like egg or blood, or even honey to really bind it nicely and make a nice paint. So it would be something different. And the issue is, again, possibly in the later Stone Age, I think there's definitely, it's an area of research that I think a lot more ochre researchers should go into, and understanding what we can see from the Middle Stone Age to the later Stone Age. The focus has kind of been on the Middle Stone Age because it's exciting, and we modern humans by then, and but the later Stone Age is telling, I don't know, I think it could be really interesting. But then the question of whether it stains your skin, the red definitely stains more, at least on my Lumo white skin. It does definitely stain it more, but it doesn't last for very long. It's when we have kids coming to do ochre workshops, I always have to tell their teachers or their parents that it washes off, don't worry. And it that's just with water, and it usually in about 2 or 3 washes. But if you're mixing it with something a little bit that has a bit more of a bind, or is more fatty, it would probably last a bit longer.
Oh, brilliant. We've got another one from Kamambo. And is it possible that most of the preparation, for example, the pounding of the ochre, was done at the source? And therefore, does this limit our understanding about the general preparation of the ochre at the site? So I guess this is about that issue you raised. If it's already crushed, are you getting a good idea of how much ochre is actually there? Maybe much of it has been eroded away or dissolved into the deposits.
Yeah, no, and it's a good point. The picture, I don't know if you can still see my slide. with the crushed up ochre, and you get really nice shales that the only way you get them out is to break them up, and you're going to get these pieces, and you're going to leave a whole lot of the powder behind. But then you get other ochres that are like, specularites and hematites that are really nice little nodules, and those will come back to the site fully. And so it's kind of hard. I think you need to understand the material and understand the sources and how they might have processed it. But it's very likely that they would have just been at the source and powdered it and brought it home somehow, in a perlmutt shell, powdered, and then mixed it there. So I think it's all these kind of questions that are important to understand the whole process, but often are quite hard to answer.
Yeah. So there's some more shout outs from Erica, Maxine, Kimberly, David, and let's see if I've missed anyone else. I think I've got them all there. And then there was about the website for the pigment reveal. So I don't have your slide up there, but maybe you can just give it to me and I'll pop it into the chat box.
Cool. Yes. So can I stop sharing my screen?
Sure. Let me change it up, and I will update it with So I'll put you to one side. And then let me put that back. There we go. And just 1 second. Let me update the stream. Gosh, let me hide myself somehow. There we go. Okay, yes, pigmentsreveal.com. Okay, let me update the stream. So it's pigmentsreveal.com.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, and it's really exciting because I think, I don't know, as a scientist, it's very easy to just go, okay, I'm doing my science and I'm only answering these questions of science, but to have other views and especially with something like ochre that is so or can be so art related, I think it's really nice to have these conversations with artists and especially Heidi Gustafsson, who kind of how I got involved with this. It's just getting just different perspectives on what these minerals mean and materials mean to us as humans in different ways.
Excellent. And Stephen Tiny Bastards joined us as well. He's been on probably the whole time, and he also says hello, and he's awesome. Very interesting talk about the wide range of ochre applications. Cool.
I'd love to work with Stephen some more sometime.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of had conversations, but it would be great to go into the field and make paint together.
You're going to have to go visit him in the Karoo, best place to be. I think that's all from the questions. I think we at the end of the time. Tammy, thank you very, very, very much. This has been a wonderful talk and very well supported this evening. There were minor connectivity issues just midway, but for a few seconds, which hopefully didn't detract too much from what you were saying. So it's just an internet stream issue, I think, which is coming through from the Wits end. Overall, it was a very smooth evening. And I ask everyone to hit the subscribe button to the ArchSoc Talks if you haven't already done so. That helps our registration for the events. And we'll catch you guys all in a month. And just again, you'd get a bottle of wine from us if you were here in person, but we'll have to do some back stock, when you're back in the Cape and come and give us a visit. Just enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you for everyone for attending.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.